I'm
Sounds good, man.
enjoying it in high def now because Noel, one of the tech guys in one of the tutorials last week, went through all these settings that you should have on in your Zoom.
Yeah.
Um, it's like high def and like spatial audio and stuff. I don't even know what it is, but it seems better.
Yeah. There's the big one to remember is that it, enable original audio, um, because it turns off all of the filtering that you want. You know the
What is it? What, like background noise?
yeah, background noise and like making telephone filter and that kind of things. So they try to compress it more and you know make it a little bit easier to hear the conversation, which totally works against you, and especially on a bass. Um, when I
Yeah.
hear people like trying to play basses over this, it's just it immediately thinks, well, that's feedback, and like suppresses it. I've had interesting lessons too, where like people have been like doing a 3 octave scale, and it's like they get through the middle range, and then it goes, oh, that must all be feedback, and then just the guitar cuts out. You watch their fingers still move. It's
Yeah.
just no sound.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking Zoom must be making so much money these days, but then I was thinking, how does Zoom even make money?
Well, they're making money off me currently.
Oh, really?
hmm Yeah. As part of this, I've had to pay for a Zoom account, one of those pro Zoom accounts, because you can't have on the Freak account you can't have this many people in a meeting for more than an hour. Sorry, for an
Um,
hour for free, so you got to pay for that, which is somewhat disappointing. Some might say that if you own the venue, you should be paying that fee, but anyway.
yeah, that makes sense though. I guess how they make money. I never knew that. That's interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and corporate license, like it's business software really, like it's business conferencing software. So like they hire out a whole bunch of corporate licenses and things like that.
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so how did we go with last week's stuff? How'd you go with looking at it? Um, this week, I have been far too ambitious. Like I barely fit in the lesson last week, and I'm like, I'll double the length of it and see if we can get that
Yeah, I was reading through, I opened up the document and I was like, man, it's like an essay. It's like 1,600 words or something.
done. Yeah.
No, it was interesting reading. I was also looking at the triad paper.
Oh yeah. Did the arpeggios? Yeah.
Yeah, that was really tricky. It's like moving my fingers up the neck, I feel.
Okay, so one thing I would suggest for that is do it in groups of four. So like, if we're talking about the major one, I'll get my finger on cam so you can see it easier. I would do something like this. Sorry, I'll move over. I can't even remember if the last one ends that way. Does it end with the? Yeah, it does. It goes up to the. Yeah, so I think it's a lot easier if you think of it in groups of four. Like beam groups are a great indicator of where a natural stop in the music should be, like natural accent pulses.
Mm.
So fingering by beam group is not usually a bad idea. And if you don't finger by your beam group, usually you have to add some kind of accent or something in order to make it feel like it's 16th notes. And the other thing that I do, which is a little peculiar, I don't know if you're the same as me, I can't bend that joint backwards, that last joint of that finger. Right? All my other ones, yep, I can get back flex on. My ring finger can't do that.
Mm.
So I never really do the partial bar fingering that a lot of people do. Like if they're doing, say, that kind of that kind of arpeggio, they quite often like rock this finger, and I can't do it at all. So I'll always use two separate fingers. Hey man. Um, and that's actually it. Generally speaking, using two separate fingers is going to be a cleaner fingering for you anyway. So what I would suggest is do it in groups of four, and try to stack your fingers over the top of one another instead of using like a hinge bar.
Mm.
And it should come under your fingers pretty easily. There's always going to be a couple of times where where it might get a little awkward. I think there's a couple in Augmented which were really, really kind of interesting fingerings. Either way, sorry. Yeah, well, okay. Either way, I'd say that take the next couple of weeks to look at it and see if you can get your fingerings together. And like again, it's not really worrying about speed so much. We're just trying to look at how, in this exercise, we're using those inversion shapes we've been talking about this year to construct something that's much larger, and also give you kind of a better idea of how they connect on the fretboard. So who we got in going now? We've got 5 people. Holy crap. We'll nearly have a whole class. All right. Well, what are we all feeling? Do you want to start with some drills? Or do you want to just jump straight into the coursework? Well, the work, the general lesson work.
Yeah.
Got a fantastic view of Christopher's fan. Yeah? Guys, unmute your mics, say hello. It's a discussion.
Hello.
Awesome. Hey, guys. Okay, so first off the book, how you been going with last week's work? So how many of you watched the lesson if you missed it? Where are we at?
Sort of having a look at some of the stuff online, getting familiar with it, like what we're doing, trying to.
Trying to?
Yeah. I haven't had a lot of time to sort of look at it at the moment, but I'm trying to really get into it now.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lily, what about you?
Oh, well, last week I actually got a loop pedal for the first time, so it's been helpful just doing a basic chord pattern, and I've been kind of just doing box 1 and 2 to improvise over it, but so I'm kind of getting stuck in that box again of just, yeah.
Okay, so if you're getting stuck in that box, you want to try transferring your licks out of the box. You know, like if you got, then you might want to try it in box 3. And they don't quite sound the same. So you'll find that the different locations on the fretboard, the different ways that those intervals map out will kind of suggest slightly different ideas to you.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd also try doing something like you map out all your flat 5s. Those flat 5 sounds, right? And if you take them across the boxes, they're really easy to still play with. It's a really iconic sound. Yeah. So yeah, make an effort to branch out. But I mean, it is not a bad thing to spend a lot of your time in the coming years doing lots of pentatonic improv and getting to know your neck in that kind of really basic way. It could be seriously good. Like all of the stuff we're going to talk about today is not that. It's not pentatonic. It's the triad work. And the way that I'm using it is that when I was much younger, I used to think exclusively pentatonic, no matter what I was doing. And there's lots of interesting avenues that let you do that, including like you can choose different pentatonic boxes to highlight different extensions. So if I'm playing A minor 9, instead of playing box 1 pentatonic, I could play box 3 pentatonic. Because the box 3 will give me those 9th extensions. So there's lots of interesting ways of using pentatonics to kind of go further and further and further with your playing, which are definitely worth looking into. But the way I think about it these days is that the pentatonics for me have become this backdrop that's always on my neck, and I always have access to that, and I know where I am in the key. But the things that I'm really focusing on in order to make my melodies better is triads and their extensions, right? So, I mean, because you guys are kind of all learning it all at once, you know, you'll need to do a bit of experimentation. You'll need to play with both. Pentatonics will get you paid. You know, like that's pretty much what every blues and rock solo in the world has ever been made with. And if you're working in cover bands and things like that, it is vital knowledge. Even if it's just like the singer forgets a verse, like it happens to all of us. It's like, okay, guitar solo, I'll jump in. And that has the same kind of steps involved in it too. Like you start off with playing unichordally, so you just choose one scale over the whole key. So we're in the key of A minor, and I don't think any further than that. I just play on A minor all over the neck. That's step one. Step two would then be trying to use them to follow the chord progressions a little bit. And in that, I really recommend you all get into blues. Like blues is a fantastic training ground for guitarists. Pretty much any style you want to get into. Like if you want to get into, you know, rock, jazz, heavy metal, whatever. Blues is this wonderful style where it's just basic enough that you can understand it very quickly as a beginner, but has a lot of scope for inflection and articulation and rhythm that other styles don't necessarily have. And in that way, they have a lot of scope, right? Like you've got a lot of room to make a mistake. You know, B.B. King sounds really different to Joe Bonamassa. And it's all the blues, right? So like, and also it's a great way of getting into your first like extensions and interesting chord scenes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Anyone else? What's been going on? I guess not. Okay. Well, just to do a little quick warm up again and just to refresh our idea on the triads, let's do major triads on. Ooh, how did you guys go with that exercise last week with the triads where we're doing 60 beats a minute going? Did everyone keep up? Ooh, I changed key. Yeah, could everyone keep up with that? Because if you can, I'll make it more complicated. But if it was a bit of a struggle, then we'll keep it simple.
I struggled a bit with the minor, but the major was all right. I think that's just practice.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely just practice. Everyone feeling the same that like major is pretty doable, but the minors are the ones that are hard. All right, consensus is yes then. So what we're going to do this time is we're going to go C and F in all of these neighboring positions. So we go C, then F, then C, then F, then C, then F, then C, then F. All right. This is a cool little move, you know, made famous by people like Keith Richards, where he's, you know, Start Me Up lick, Werewolves of London. All that kind of thing. That's a 4/1 cadence, right? And when we do that with the triads, we get this kind of stuff. All right. So just to go over them real slow, C in first inversion. Then we get F root. C second inversion. Then F first inversion. C root inversion. F second inversion. And then we're back up to the top again. C first, F root. Alrighty, so I'll throw on a metronome. Because it's trickier, let's go for 50 beats per minute today. That is so quiet.
Do we mute our mics or keep them on?
Probably better if you mute your mics at this stage. Otherwise, everyone will be slightly out of time with each other. So 1, 2, 3, CF, 4, and all right, restart. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, let's try the minors going up and down. C minor. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, and the other one from last week was ascending sixes in pentatonic on the DGB strings. Don't know if anyone looked at that. It was this one. Lily, if you're looking for ways of moving between boxes and breaking out of boxes, it's not a bad way of doing it. All right. Did anyone practice that one? Is it worth actually doing as a drill for a minute? We're getting a shake from Sean. Who else? Who else? Come on. Did anyone practice it?
I didn't practice that.
No? All right. Well, we'll skip past it then. So these are the kind of drills you guys should be doing a lot of. You should be trying to think of more and interesting ways of using them. It's really the only way of developing your technique in a solid way is to do some drills. So you've definitely got to just bust out the metronome, add it to your daily practice of doing some kind of drills. And it doesn't really matter which ones you choose. You should target whatever area you feel like you're most lacking in, or that you feel like you want to get more of an improvement out of. All right, so onto the sheet today. This is the big semester 2 guitar workshop document thing. Up the top of the sheet, we have the tetrachord diagram, as always. Learn to love it. The whole point of today, last week we talked about how to take your triads, use those pentatonic notes in order to turn them into 6s and 9 arpeggios. That kind of stuff. And this week, I'd like to take that much further by giving you a list of extensions you could add to all of those triads. So if you look way down the page, so I think it's the second last page. Yeah, the second last page is just a list of extensions, how to find them from major and minor triads, and some guidelines on what you could try throwing these extensions on. Now, those guidelines aren't always going to work. Like in the major chord, we have the sharp chord, the augmented fourth. And that's really only going to work in a subdominant position most of the time. So, you'd have to suck it and see. And it won't always work for you either. Some people don't like huge amounts of tension in chords. I think the more you play with these, the more you learn to enjoy them. So out of this lesson, that sheet is the best thing that you could start to internalize and remember. And I think the best way of internalizing that stuff and remembering it is applying it to some songs. You know, bust out some jazz standards, bust out some songs that you think where extensions are going to play well, and start listening to them, start playing with them. All right, above that, we've got, so all the way back up again, we have a really quick rundown about why we have things called the dominant chord in the first place. So I'm going to try to whiz through this as quick as possible. First off, you see that chart, we've got chord number and the old money name. So before we started using the natural numbering system, before we started using Roman numerals to represent things, we had words, tonic, supertonic, median, subdominant, dominant, submedian, leading, and tonic octave as the ways of describing the positions in the key. Now they also describe something about their function and their relationship to one another. There is kind of this relative minor, relative major relationship, like the the 2 and the 4 are relative major, relative minor, right? So naturally they have, the 2 and the 4 have this kind of connection between the two. There was also, when you started talking about the theory they were using at the time, those words really describe the way that chords move into each other. You usually take tonic chords and move them into dominant chords. A median chord is kind of a joining chord. Most importantly for our chat though, dominant is 5. It's the 5 chord. And when we have a 5 chord, something really interesting happens. If we make a triad and extend it out a third, like we normally would to get a 7th chord, we get a different set of notes than we would in that chord's home key. So there's a little centered quote there saying, in the key of G, a G chord with a 7th would have the notes G, B, D, and F sharp, right? In the key of C, when we make a G chord, we have the notes G, B, D, and F. And this poses a problem for our naming system, doesn't it? We can't just call the one that happens in major scales G7. I mean, we could, but then we'd have to come up with another name for the one that happens when it's the 5 chord. Right? What we came up with was using dominant as the name. So a G dominant 7, i.e. the dominant 7 is the 7 that happens when the chord is in the 5 position, is the flat 7. All right? Now, what's the point of a dominant chord? Oh, sorry, there's also another thing just beneath that, which I've got this kind of like running joke with all my students where I say, in the musical justice system, everything is presumed major and dominant, right? If you have a chord title, C M7, like C little m7, that means a C minor chord with a flat 7 in it, right? Because the C minor, well, the minor attaches to the C, and the 7, well, everything is presumed dominant. So dominant is left out, and we just get 7. Right? In the next example, we've got C M, little m, capital M7. Well, that means it's a C minor chord with a major 7. If it says major, it is a major 7. There's almost no reason for us to say major at any time to one another. I mean, you know, whenever you're saying chords to your friend, you go C, D, E, and the major part is assumed. Similarly, if I say C7, the major and the dominant are presumed, right? I don't say C major dominant 7, we just say C7. And if I'm going to tell you to use the major 7th, I will put major in the title, C major 7. The major does not attach to the C, it attaches to the 7. Make sense? We can all unmute our mics now, guys, like it's totally cool to talk. Yeah, so it's just a little like a cheat way of thinking about all of the chord names, right? Everything presumed major, everything presumed dominant. Okay, so now we're onto our interval section of the chat. So the 2 intervals that we added last week were 6 and 9 to all of our triads. Anyone remember what's special about 6 and 9 to a major triad? No takers? Come on, guys. Unmute mics. Join a discussion.
Sorry,
This
what,
is-
what,
this is-
what was the question again?
What is 6 and 9 to a major triad? Like, why are they
Oh.
special? What was the whole clarifying point of doing that last week? Last fortnight? Why is 6-9 like why is 6-9 special? Where is that extension? Where would we use it? Right? 6 and 9 are the ones that directly borrow outside of the pentatonic. Right? So a major pentatonic 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 5, 6. Right? So by having 1, 2, and 3, well, that's the 2 is the 9, 6 is the second last note of the scale. So they're the ones that are going to work really easy all the time. If you've got a chord progression on the major chords, not the dominant chords, you could throw in 6s, and it pretty much doesn't do anything to the chord. It's a very soft extension. It adds a little bit of color, but it doesn't really add any tension that has to be done. It doesn't point in a direction, right? Same with C add 9. I mean, like, you kind of all already know this because you've seen 101 singers, and like, you know, Christina Perry's 1,000 Years, heaps of those songs. If they're going to throw in an extension on a chord, it's going to be add 9. You know, it's very clean. It's not very dissonant. It's not very spicy at all. It's very safe to use almost all the time. So 6s and 9s are important because whenever you're on a major chord that is not a dominant chord, they're a good choice. They're a good choice for just a little bit of color. You know. So in that vibe, right, what are some spicy ones we could add to major chords? Well, a major 7 is a really great example of a spicy interval. You know, like, I know usually I say something like, it's almost like sickly sweet. You have these consecutive thirds, and it sounds like, you know, angels going, ah. Right? But that's kind of an illusion by how everyone's first C major 7, i.e. this one, or this one, the standard C major 7s on guitar, right? Those 3. It's kind of an illusion created by those chords because what they've really studiously avoided doing is putting the 7th extension anywhere near the root. So in this C major 7, right, the major 7th is the open B string, and the only C note we have in the chord is down here on the A string. And because you've got that separated by an octave, that sounds alright. It doesn't sound super dissonant. Flamenco players, however, do a cool trick. They make a C chord, and they put the B here. Everyone probably knows this C7, right? C Dom 7. Well, if you move your pinky out of fret, you get a C major 7. And it immediately shows you how spicy major 7 really is. Right? That is quite a lot of dissonance. Right? Quite a lot of inherent tension in the chord. And inherent tension usually wants to be resolved somewhere. Right? If we have it in the standard, you know, jazz 1, 6, 2, 5 kind of progression, right, that major 7th gets resolved in the next chord by coming up a fret to the C note, the 3rd from the A. Right? It creates motion in the same way that it creates motion in a scale, right? If everyone's singing the tonic, right? And it's the same on the 4th too. I don't know about you, but in my head I'm going da 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 da. I just want it to come all the way back down, right? And that's an interesting point to acknowledge because the 7 and the 4, right, are inherently tense points in the scale because they're a semitone apart. Everything else is a tone apart. And a tone does not push as hard as a semitone, a chromatic movement will. So, major 7s. Let's take a quick look at how to put them on our inversions. So if we take our root inversion, our first inversion down here, right, we could find one of the major 7s here by taking off our first finger. That would be one option. A semitone below the root. Right? And we could go through all of them doing that same thing. So semitone below the root, root's on the middle, semitone below the root. Right? Here's the root position. Semitone lower than the root. Well, there's the root. Right? And there'd be a whole bunch of C major 7s. Now, another way of finding them, as we pointed out with that flamenco major 7, the really spicy one, is going a major third, right, a major third above the 5th. So we could do this, right? This is our second inversion shape here. We go a major third above the 5th. We get this major 7. I love these sounds. I love this for minor 9. I love this for major 7. One of the things I like doing when I'm playing around with chords is it's almost like you create a problem that you resolve. You know, like... So every time I create a dissonance, it's almost like it tells me that line has to move. Right? Every time you add a dissonance, it just sounds like that's tension and it's suggesting a melody that's got to go somewhere. Okay, so major thirds above the 5th, so got this major third, got that major third, got this major third. Right, because the 5th is down here. Now, one thing that's really interesting to think about is in the first example where we're moving all of our roots down a semitone, you'll notice that we make them all E minor chords. Right, like that's the easiest one to see. But this next one, that's an E minor triad, right? That's first inversion E minor. Up here at the root inversion, again we make it that A minor shape, E minor, second inversion. You should just take notes. Like there is going to be so many times when you're playing around with these triads and you go, hey, wait a minute, this chord is this chord. And yeah, it is the answer. You know, someone else is playing C major 7, you can play E minor. Someone's playing in the key, someone's playing C major chords and you want to kind of solo in a way that sounds like an outside thing, play E minor pentatonic. Right? Like all of these rules are transferable. If one thing works, all things work. So if you know there's a rule, hey, if someone's playing C major 7, well, I could play E minor pentatonic. It's going to sound kind of jazzy. It'll sound like you're hitting the extensions a lot. And occasionally you might have to throw in a C just to help ground it all again. But it's a good way of working. And it also tells you some tricks about like how to apply some of these other scale ideas to more and more complex things. If you find a rule that works with your triads, like you're looking at, so I mean, I also said this isn't just major 7, this is minor 9, like this is A minor 9. Right? Here's an A minor triad. And if I go a tone above the root, this is what we discussed last week about how to find a 9th, right? That's an A minor 9. The other way of thinking about it is if I had started on C, and went up a major third, now it's C major 7. So A minor 9 and C major 7, really, really, really similar chords, and are essentially interchangeable. If you have things that work over A minor 9, they will work over C major 7. Okay, so getting familiar with those, getting familiar with the idea that where you put an extension in a chord is important. You know, you should have preferences, or at least you should have circumstantial preferences, right? Like my preference at the moment is for extensions that have clashes in them. I like having a rub inside the chord. I think all of these kind of things sound blander to me. Well, I mean that one doesn't, it's a cool sound. But yeah, just the more standard shapes sound a little bland. I like using some of the, like this is a really trumpet line kind of dominant 7, rather than, all right, and it's all because of the interval stacking. I'm putting the 7th against the root. You You know, so you've got this tone to start the chord and then the third on top. So start thinking about where you put them. It's always good to have a path to find a couple of different places for these things. Next up, in terms of major, and in terms of making major spicy, we have an augmented fourth. So in the sheet music here, because we're talking about mostly subdominant is where you're going to apply an augmented fourth, or a sharp 11, or a flat 5 if you know you're mostly guitar in your basement. Yeah, so it's mostly going to happen on your 4 chord, and that's mostly because of the way the scale plays out, right? Like if you think of key of F, key of C, sorry. If you think about the notes in the key of C, right? Can we all see that G string? G, A, B. All right. Well, to an F chord, the normal 4 would only be a semitone above the 3rd, B flat. Right? So if we throw in B flat, it's likely to sound a little out of place diatonically if we want to be, totally correct to the key signature. And the thing that the key signature suggests that we do instead is use a sharpened fourth, an augmented fourth. All right, so it's an F chord with a B in it. So we could do that this way too. Right? Augmented fourths are very, very spicy, but they are going to work to make the 4 chord a hell of a lot more interesting. This Lydian sound, I think, is particularly kind of bright and delicate. Now, you, by all means, do not have to borrow my words for how I think about the sounds of these things, but you do have to come up with your own. As a player, it is so important to be able to describe sounds to yourself. I mean, the cliche is everyone says Phrygian sounds kind of Spanish. Right? Come up with your own. Come up with one of ways of making them make sense to you. Do it with chords, do it with extensions. I'm currently using this kind of like spicy scale. I'm trying to think of how much tension does each chord need. What is the point of the tension in this chord? Like, does the tension in this chord point somewhere? If it points somewhere, then I want to make sure that the tensions are used to point that way. Nothing is worse than using tension for no reason. Like if you don't resolve a tension properly, it sounds wrong. It's like what we were talking about last time. We were saying, if you're in the middle of an improvisation and you sit on the 4th on a chord, it sounds off. It sounds like it needs to go somewhere, right? It creates a whole bunch of tension, and you need to do something with that, or you need to make not doing something with that the point of what you're doing. Think about the end solo in My Guitar Gently Weeps. Just that one note. Bing, ba bing, ba bing, ba ba bing, bing, ba bing, ba bing, ba ba bing. And the whole idea of that solo is the chords around it are changing the tension that note appears to show, right? So what's interesting there is the fact that he's intentionally ratcheting tension, choosing one note, choosing it in a kind of a staccato, stuttery rhythm that is ratcheting tension up. And what is interesting about it is how the chords make that note sound different. If you can't bring it to mind, like totally check it out and listen to it. It's one of those solos that is super divisive. Some people are like, it's just one note. It's not really playing music. If that is you too, there's a fantastic Adam Neely. I don't know if you guys watch enough Adam Neely, but there's a fantastic Adam Neely clip where he's talking about the world's worst sax solo. I'm pretty sure it's sax solo. He has a great dig into all of those kind of things. Alrighty, so our dominant chord. 5 chord in the key. What is the point of a dominant chord, and why have I given the dominant chord some of the spiciest intervals? Short of that augmented fourth, the dominant, we would commonly throw in flat 7, sharp 5, sharp 9, flat 9, all kinds of crap on a dominant chord. Why? Does anyone know why the dominant chord might get those kind of extensions?
Because it's trying to lead back to the tonic, so the more dissonance, the more it leads back.
Right, yeah, provided you resolve those out properly, then yeah, absolutely. So first off, a dominant chord almost always has a 7 on it. All right, and why? Well, so we can contain that tritone, the 3 and the 7, sorry, the 4 and the 7, the two that are only a semitone away from another note in the key, and they naturally want to raise and fall respectively, right? So here's the tritone from C, and they do this, right? Beautiful, classical, perfect cadence. So this is kind of concept. It's like, if the point of it is to push back to 1, why don't we really hammer that point home? So if I did something like this, right? That extra tension made that resolve even stronger. What did I do? I put in a sharp 5. So to a G chord, that's an augmented 5th. So now I have Dom 7, 3rd, and augmented 5th, and that's going to resolve out to major 3rd, root, major 3rd. So now we're approaching the major 3rd from 2 directions. Right? And it's the same with most of the other extensions you might put on a dominant chord, right? Like we put a flat 9 on there, so we go. Right, so we're doing sharp 1, flat 9. Right, that resolves out to. Right? Sorry, should be that one. So, got to find some locations for various things. So, you take the triads. This time we're going to be using G. Augmented 5th. We find all the 5ths and we sharpen them. In root position, the 5th is on top. Take it, we sharpen it. Right, we get an augmented triad. Which you might also notice is the start of the major line cliche. There are a whole bunch of these cliches that are worth talking about. The major and minor line cliches, which all involve essentially taking a chord that you're going to sit on for a very long time and moving a chromatic line in that chord just to give you some kind of interest. Right, so there's our first one. Here's our next G. All right, in first inversion, 5th is in the middle, sharpen it. Right, then we come up to second inversion. Now we sharpen the 5th, which is in the bottom. All right, augmenteds, I think, are really pretty sounds. I think of them as being a very, very, very bright major sound. They are, in many ways, also the same as a major minor 7. This is one of those times where the more you start practicing, the more you'll realize, hey, I'm doing an augmented shape. Am I? Or is this kind of like, is that G augmented, or is it C minor major 7, you know? Nobody knows. Could be either. Depends on whether or not we found a C. Okay, flat 9s on a G. So flat 9 could be found a minor 2nd below the root, or it could be found a minor 3rd above the major 3rd. So if we take actually, that's a mistake on the thing. It should be, if you want to change that, guys, a minor 2nd above the root, not below it. Right, below the root would be a major 7th. That's a typo for me getting these things typed up too quickly. Right, so flat 9 is found as a semitone above the root, and I'm pretty sure that so in the big chart, follow the big chart where it says extensions from major and minor triads. That one under the major chords is a mistake. Okay, so find your roots, sharpen them. All right, this you might notice is a diminished chord voicing. All right, so then we move up to the next G chord. and we find the root and we sharpen it. All right. This is another diminished chord voicing, you know, but you might also notice it's like an E7 voicing too. Right? Showing that there's kind of a really strange link between dominant chords and diminished chords. Last one. All right, we find the root is in the middle, and we sharpen it. All right, and yet again, another diminished voicing, but also the middle part of an E7 voicing. So there's this kind of message getting driven home that if we have a G chord and an E chord, and put them together, like we might put G on E, we're getting a kind of a diminished sound. Right? We're constantly using these E7 voicings with G's in them. Some kind of weird combinations. Or G sharps, really, I should say, because we're sharpening. Okay. So, taking all of this stuff to a chord progression. This is where... Oh, man, I can't believe we've got 15 minutes to do this. This is where you guys need to really do a bit of work. First off, you should be able to play the chart there just with basic triads, just no colors on them unless unless they're a 7, which 7s are important. You should be able to play through it. What's this? How's the song go? There's this conversation that brings this sensation. Oh no, it's just the nearness of you. Right, it's a simplification of the chord progression from that song. And you should be able to run through it like that, at least in 3 different locations on the neck. Right? I would suggest that you, say, tackle one of the lines at a time. It's also worth taking notes about certain things that are happening here, and I'll point them out for you. Okay, first part we got E. Then we get a 2-5 change into A, right? This is secondary dominant substitution. B minor is the 2 chord of A, E7 is the 5 chord of A, and then we resolve that to A. All right? This 2-5-1 kind of cadence is something you're going to come across in all styles of music all the time. Secondary dub substitution is crazy common. So you might want to write it above there. I don't know if you've printed it out. If you printed it out, then like pen it on top of there. Make some notes. Next up, we get A to A minor. A is the 4 chord here, and A minor is the minor 4. This is a really, really, really common thing to do on the 4 chord. It's one of my favorite things to do on the 4 chord, and a lot of people think of it as like the heartbreak chord change. Right? If you've got a song that you want to ratchet up that tension on the 4 chord and make it sadder, 4 to 4 minor is great. And why are we doing it? Well, it establishes a kind of a chromatic line. You know, if we imagine this first E as E major 7, major 7th is here, right? Then we go to B minor, E7, to an A, to an A minor, down to an E. Right? So you notice what I did there? Major 7th, 3rd of the B minor, E7, 3rd of the A, 3rd of the A minor, 5th of the E. It's a chromatic falling line. These are the kind of things that voicings lead you towards and sound really nice. And it's why we're getting it, is because each one of these chords has this chromatic push that is just going to push you along to that next chord. So in that way, by playing a chord that is out of the key, A minor is not in the key of E. It's in the key of E minor. It's tonic borrowing. Sorry, modal interchange. By doing this, right, you can hear really clearly there. Right, it really pushes that down. So it is going to be a common movement. One of my favorite movements for beginners to improvise with because it's so distinctive. One of the things that you guys should really look out for is anytime you hear chords, you're like, wow, one of those lines in that chord is really obvious. I can hum that in my head. I think of this chord change and I go, ma-da-da. If you can do that kind of stuff, then you are ready to start improvising with it as a suggested line. More on that later. So, finishing off the second line of it, we have this E, C sharp 7, F sharp minor, B7. That is a 1-6-2-5 change. You are going to get sick of seeing those. They are everywhere. The one thing is that you might notice the 6 has been made dominant. Why? Why would we make the 6 dominant? So the C sharp minor in this case, sorry, the C sharp dominant, C sharp 7, where it should be C sharp minor.
It has a stronger pull to the F sharp.
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
gonna say
why?
5-1.
Yeah, 5-1, right? It's a dominant cadence. Yeah, you're totally right. Stronger pull to the F sharp. It's also a super common cliche. In fact, it's a really common cliche to make them all major. Just have this cycling dominance thing. Right? That's probably a legacy from blues, right? Blues musicians weren't classically educated. So they have this thing where in blues, everything gets to dominant 7. If you like it in one place, why wouldn't you like it in all places? So let's just blanketly use dominant 7s everywhere. Which is strange, right? Like dominants, as we've been talking about in functional harmony, dominant 7s are pointing chords. So what happens to music when all of your chords point, but they don't necessarily point to where they're going? It would be extremely strange for you had you grown up listening exclusively to music that based itself around functional harmony. You would have listened to blues with all of its, and there just would have been times you're like, this is just breaking key rules. This is not playing music. And remember, music is the pattern recognition game we play, all right? You hear 2 notes and your brain goes, I know how to complete this, it's this kind of scale. I know how to complete this, I can hum the next few bars. So your brain is constantly predicting the next thing that's going to happen in music. If you constantly get that right, you get dopamine hits and you like the music. If you don't, then it's quite likely you'll say things like, this music just sounds all the same. One of the things that I learned by studying more and more and more harmony is that music styles that you thought were totally inaccessible and noise suddenly don't stay that way. You know, jazz is really far out. Jazz is a strange strategic game that musicians are playing with your assumed knowledge of the harmony and then what they do to it. So if you don't have that assumed knowledge, it just sounds like noise. You don't understand how those lines connect together. But if you can track the way that they are imposing interesting ideas on top of interesting harmony, that has also all been taken one step away from the original progression, then it sounds like noise to you. You know? And it should strike you as kind of obvious when you hear people say things like, oh, I love rock and roll, I hate country. I'm one of those people. I constantly say I hate country music. Totally not true. Some of the things that I've gotten into the most in the past few years, like Joey Landreth, have a real country backbone. I was raised listening to the Beatles, and I think Jackson Browne is a fantastic songwriter. They're all people that have country influences. What I don't like is, you know, the boot scooting, shit kicking country. But it would be dumb for me to say that that is on the music and it's not on the schema or it's not on me. Right? The music essentially uses the same functional tools as rock, especially modern country. Modern radio country is classic rock. And the things that you don't like about them are very aesthetic differences from a technical point of view. They are microrhythms, they're inflections, they're the tone choices. But the chord progressions that we see in front of us here from jazz, they're going to be recycled to you in 101 classical pieces. They're going to be recycled to you in all kinds of different country and blues and rock and pop and trip hop, right? Like it's pretty much all the same tools we're working with. We just put different skins on it. So if you're interested in trying to find avenues into music that you kind of don't like, that's not a bad way of starting. It's analyzing their harmony, trying to find out why they have chosen this aesthetic compared to another aesthetic that you quite like. So, right, on to the second line. So we did the 1-6-2-5 with the 6 being dominant, making it stronger for the F sharp minor. Then we get G sharp, C7, F sharp minor, B7. Anyone notice anything about that? First off, it would be worth thinking about your numerals, right? So what positions are they in the key? And are any of them a breaking of the key signature?
Which chords?
The last 2 bars, G sharp minor, C7, F sharp minor, B7.
I think the only one that's not in the key is the C sharp 7 again.
Yep.
Because it's been made dominant instead of minor.
Yep. So we're doing that because
it is dominant to the F sharp again.
Right, secondary dominant. I know it's a repeat. I'm just hammering home.
Hmm.
Okay, but one relationship you may not have flagged is that they're all 2-5s. It's descending 2-5s, right? G minor to C sharp, that's a 2-5. F sharp minor to B7, that's a 2-5. We're doing a 2-5-2-5-1. And this is something which we're going to see all the time, right? 3-6-2-5-1. Why? We're moving through the key in fourths. Fourths are inherently musical. It's one of those things that we're just going to keep hitting over and over and over and over again. And it's another one of these really common movements that we're going to have to find solutions for in our playing. And yeah, again, it's going to happen in all kinds of different keys. All kinds of different styles. So underneath it, I've written out, okay, so you could do something like this. We could apply some of the rules from up top where we said any major chord. Major chords could get 6s, they could get 9s, and they could get major 7s. And if they're in a subdominant position especially, we could do an augmented fourth if we're feeling particularly frisky. If it's a minor chord, we can get, remember that from last week's discussion, we were talking about that with minor chords, if you add a 7 or you add a 4, you tend to soften the chord. But if you add a 9 or a 6, you actually make it far sadder and kind of harder hitting. So in the second bar here, I've chosen minor 9 to an E7 flat 9. Why? Well, the E7 is great voice leading to the A major 7, but the flat 9 also gives us chromatic shift down to the 5th of the A. So we're heightening tension twice. Right? I'm a massive fan of the flat 9 sound. I think it's really distinctive. One of the reasons why I'm hitting it a couple of times in this is that I think they're good notes for you guys to start targeting. They're so orally distinctive that you should be able to find them quite easy when you're improvising, or know that you should be on them at that point. So it goes on to list a whole bunch of extensions that you might want to apply. Now, you do not have to follow that. For your practice this week or this fortnight, what I really want you to do and what I want us to come back and kind of show each other what we've done is, one, you have to be able to play the progression just with standard shapes without worrying about your extensions. Just, get it done. Preferably if you can get it done in a couple of positions. Right? Start on different E's and see where it takes you. There are almost infinite permutations of this. You can apply certain interesting rules to yourself. Like I've done ones where I say, okay, I'm going to start here and I'm going to do all of my chords climbing. So E, then we go B minor, then we go E7, and then we go up to A, and then we get A minor, and then we get E, C sharp 7, right? Like we just keep climbing the neck. How could I do that with voicings? These are games you should play with yourself. Can I do them all descending? Can I do them all so they stay in one position? Can I do them so they always seem to leap backwards and forwards on the neck? Doesn't matter. Choose any kind of rule, apply it to yourself, see if it works. The journey is unbelievably valuable. All right, and really, 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 really quickly, because I'm going to have to wrap up to go to my next lesson. We have this massive chart here. Extensions from plain, major, and minor triads. This is the work. You're going to take this and the rules we have discussed and apply it to that chord progression. All right? It's totally up to you which ones you use. The last page, kind of me driving this point home. So here are 3 different options that I came up with while I was writing this out. And what I want you to do is explore these and think about what this does to the chord progression, what this does to the harmony. Example 1 does this. thought was a particularly pretty way of doing these voicings. You'll notice that I'm doing things where voicings naturally lead to one another. The chords are as close as I can possibly get them, right? In the beginning, you'll notice that I'm pedaling this C sharp, sorry, not C sharp, this G sharp on top a lot, the third here, right? Almost every line makes a kind of a melody. Right? Sounds way more interesting than... All right, here's option 2. If I can read it. 5 and 6. All right, I'm starting down here. All right, slightly different kind of thing. Instead of climbing and ratcheting tension, it's kind of sitting around the middle of the neck. And the last one, all right. What I've done here is I've started with my basic chords, and I've just found where the extensions are. All right. When I'm on this major 7th chord to begin with, I think, well, I want a B minor and an E7, right? I could do something as simple as that, but instead of doing that, I went with doing a minor 6 chord. Right, so here's the inversion we're all familiar with. And I move that top note down to a minor 6. That note is really distinctive and sharp sounding to me. It's a lot of tension, so I'm like, well, okay, pedal it, and let's move this note, instead of being the 5th, can now become the dominant 7 of the E. And then we can move this note down to the sharp 9. 2 very, very close voicings for this 2-5. All right, resolves out into the major 7. All right, you can see again my proclivity for having these rubs. Right, I could have done this major 7 like this, but I didn't feel like that sounded as cool. You know, it does establish this interesting pedal, and maybe that's what you're interested in, is having this pedal tone. You know, you can find a lot of these things by, after you've experimented around a bit, just creating a rule. Can I pedal one tone? Can I always have this note in every chord? Right? It's all about experimentation, thinking about these things, seeing these intervals and how they relate to each chord on the fretboard as you move. So, this 2 weeks work, get familiar with the chords at least in one position. Right? And then find ways of adding extensions to them to create more interest. You know, like one I didn't use here, that one I really like would be starting... right? Little things like that, where you're kind of adding the extensions as lines, they're suggesting ways of moving, right? All starts very simply. Just start with your basics and try finding extensions around there.
So you said make lines out of the extensions.
Yeah, I mean, like, in many ways, that the tension created by the extension points you in a direction, right? You know, you can make these non sequiturs. Like if you just apply random rules, like random, what a lot of beginner jazz students might do something like this. Right? It's okay, but it doesn't inherently give us too much direction. It's kind of clumsy. It's very much the way guitarists think about playing chords, which is chords are these block things I hold on when I strum. All right, and the way that other instruments, if you're writing for strings, if you're writing as a pianist, they think about it like this. They think about it as triads and lines, right? So instead of doing, say, major 7 like this and that, if I did just the triad voicings like this, that created some interesting sounds, didn't it? Da, da, really interesting and interval to hear all of a sudden inside of the chords. Right? So it's going to take a little bit of experimentation and playing around. I imagine probably what you'll do is you'll find that there's a whole bunch of extensions that you immediately like. You'll probably really like minor nines. You know, you might have an affinity for minor 11s. I certainly do. Like, this chord is super in vogue. You see anyone on Instagram or on YouTube, they all know this chord. And it's just a basic, you know, E shape with a minor 11. Right, so we've got the dominant 7th from moving the root back, and then we've got the 4 by coming off from the 5th by tone. So the chord goes root, dominant 7th, 3rd, then we get 4th and 7. So 4 and 7 means it's a minor 11. Yeah, I know that technically speaking, a minor 11 should also have the 9 in it, but guitar tends to just drop tons and tons and tons of notes. We can't play a 13 chord. You know, 13 chords are supposed to have 7 notes in them, and we got 6 strings. So quite often a guitarist will do this with 4 notes and say, yeah, that's a 13. Because to most guitarists, anything with a 6 and a 9 in it is a 13. You know, the 6 is the 13, so it's the color tone. The 9 is this kind of bright thing that's nice to add in. You know, a flat 7 might be good, but then it also kind of makes the chord less usable in a way. Because I could play this over major 13s or dominant 13s, because it doesn't contain the flat 7, which is the only real difference between major and dominant chains of those extensions. That's a totally different theoretical discussion to get into. So this fortnight, apply your triads to this chord progression. Find some extensions you like. You can just go through that list and, you know, try out a few of the different options. I'm sure that once you start playing with it, you will get some suggestions out of it. You know, maybe you want to start on this B major add 9, and to me that might suggest that you might be doing, you know, B minors like this, and then into this kind of E dominant sound, because those voicings are nice and close together and they sound nice together, right? Have some fun with it. Treat it compositionally. It's a good way of you figuring out, one, what the extensions are, what their colors are, what their purposes are, getting familiar with them too. And once you're familiar with them, they're going to be easy to be the notes that you throw in during your soloing, which is really what's going to make your lines and your playing sound more cohesive and sound more like you're playing stuff that's written rather than just jamming. All right, guys. Well,
arpeggio sheet as well.
Yeah, look, if you can get the triad work is more important. The arpeggio sheet, I definitely would like you to look at and play through. It's very, very, very good for you figuring out how all the triads kind of link together on the neck. It's also the kind of arpeggio exercise I wish I'd been given more of, because it covers a lot of the neck and shows you where a lot of these things are, and kind of gives you suggestions on how to kind of move through them. Like, if you can move that to be flowing, then that would be a huge leap forward in your practice. You'll find that just as you're playing one of these shapes, you'll be able to connect it with another one a little easier. It's not a bad drill. I would suggest fingering it in the beam group, so I finger it 4 notes at a time. So if you just think about each 4 notes as their own problem to solve them, and then move on to the next 4 notes. So for example, instead of doing something like, which trapped me in a fingering position, I'm going to cross up with my first finger, which means I can get down there, right? Right, so you can see that I'm always making that transition and setting my fingers up for the next set of 4. Alrighty, guys, I gotta run to my next one.
Thank you.
Have a really good week. Feel free to hit me up with as many emails and things as you want in order to clarify. Chris, I'd like to have a chat with you about anything you need to do to catch up or what you learned last semester. So hit me up on email.
No worries, yeah.
Video. All right, guys, have a good one.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you very
See you in
much.
2 weeks.